The harvest arrived in Umudike with a fanfare and a sense of awe that the village would remember for generations to come. In a normal year, a farmer and his immediate family, perhaps with the help of a few close cousins, could harvest their entire crop in a matter of a few days or a week if the rain had been particularly kind to the soil. But for Okeke, the task was so monumental that it defied the efforts of a single household. He was forced to hire nearly 30 of the strongest young men from the village, men who were themselves struggling with their own meager yields, promising them a generous portion of the grain just to help him dig up the massive yams and haul the endless rows of corn. When the very first yam was finally pulled from the deep, loosened red earth, a collective gasp of pure astonishment went up from the laborers. It was not a mere tuber, it was a giant of the earth. It was the size of a grown man's entire torso, heavy, firm, and flawlessly brown, without a single blemish, wormhole, or sign of rot. As the days stretched into weeks, the pile of yams at the center of Okeke's compound grew into a literal mountain of food. The maize was so plentiful that Okeke had to commission the village carpenters to build 3 additional granaries, and even then, the golden ears of corn threatened to burst through the wooden slats like water breaching a dam. Okeke was now, without any shadow of a doubt, the wealthiest man in the region. He spent his days walking among his piles of food, his hands clasped firmly behind his back and his chest puffed out like a proud rooster. He began to envision himself sitting at the very head of the village council, wearing the double-beaded anklet of an Ozo-titled man, a position that would grant him ultimate respect. He saw his daughters married to the sons of powerful kings from the river kingdoms, and his sons owning half the livestock in the entire valley. He felt invincible, as if he had outsmarted fate itself. However, as the sun began to set on the final day of the harvest, the time for the counting and the reckoning began. According to the solemn, terrifying vow he had made in the chilling silence of the sacred grove, he was supposed to divide this mountain of wealth exactly in half. He stood in front of his main barn with a charcoal stick and a smoothed wooden slate, trying to do the math in his head, but the numbers felt like lead in his mind. 12,000 yams, he whispered to himself, his heart suddenly feeling heavy and constricted. The vow I made says I must give away 6,000 yams. 6,000 yams! The number felt like a physical blow to his stomach. He looked at the massive, beautiful pile of tubers, each one a testament to the blessing he had received. He thought about the great market across the river, where merchants from the distant city would pay a fortune in cowries and gold for yams of this magnificent quality. He thought about the massive stone house he could build, the fine coral beads he could buy for his neck, and the rows of fat cows he could have tethered in his yard to show his status. 6,000 yams to the poor and the temple? He muttered to the shadows, his eyes narrowing with a burgeoning resentment. The poor did not dig them up. They did not feel the skin-blistering sun on their necks while I worked until my hands bled. They did not stay awake at night worrying about the wind or the guests. Why should the lazy widow at the end of the road, who spent her days sleeping in the shade, eat the same choice food as the man who owns the valley and did the work? A small nagging voice in the very back of his mind reminded him of the sudden vibration of the earth beneath the great Iroko tree and the cold supernatural wind that had answered his desperate prayer. But greed is a master of disguise. It disguised itself as logic and personal fairness. He began to convince himself that the gods, being spirits of the air and earth, didn't actually have physical stomachs. They didn't eat yams. They only required the honor of a symbolic gift. Surely, he reasoned with himself,
The goddess would be more pleased with a man who managed his wealth wisely and grew the village economy than one who threw it away to people who hadn't earned a single tuber. "I will give a tenth," Okeke decided, his face hardening into a mask of stubborn, foolish pride. A tenth is still more than any man in the long history of Umudike has ever given to the shrine at once. It is a kingly gift by any standard. No god would be angry with a tenth of such a massive, unheard-of bounty. He called his laborers over and told them to set aside a small portion consisting of the smallest, most shriveled yams and the grain that had been slightly pecked by birds or dampened by the dew. "Take this to the shrine of Allah," he commanded, refusing to look them in the eye. "Tell the priest it is the first fruit of Okeke's labor, given with a grateful heart." As the laborers carried the meager, insulting offering away, the sky, which had been a clear, brilliant blue just moments before, was suddenly obscured by a thin, sickly yellow mist that smelled faintly of old copper and decay.